Welcome to the Twin Labs podcast, where we help you make better decisions using AI and digital twins. If you are a manager, an executive, or just, someone who feels the weight of high-stakes choices, this deep dive is for you.
It is, because our mission is centered on providing the frameworks, the rigorous decision architecture that underpins organizational success. We aren't just talking about making a choice. We're talking about structuring the process of choice to ensure high-quality outcomes every single time.
And we're diving deep into the very anatomy of decision-making today. We've synthesized a whole stack of sources, from behavioral economics and cognitive science all the way to formal systems engineering, all designed to give you a shortcut to being fundamentally well-informed on this topic.
And we have to start with a brutal truth that really establishes the urgency of this discussion. Recent studies show that a large majority, I'm talking 72% of executives, report that bad decisions happen as often as, or even more often than, good ones within their organizations.
Wow.
Think about that. Think about the cumulative drain on resources, on morale, on market position that represents. That systemic inefficiency is a massive anchor dragging down performance.
That statistic is staggering, and it really makes our mission here clear. Our goal today isn't just to define terms, it's to provide you with an immediate toolkit for organizational defense against poor choices. We're going to cover the duality of decision types, how they align with the organizational hierarchy, how the information context changes everything, and maybe most critically, the cognitive traps that are just waiting for you.
By the end of this deep dive, you will have a structured way of diagnosing the exact type of decision in front of you, be it routine or revolutionary, and applying the appropriate analytical rigor. And this knowledge lets you allocate your most precious resource, your high-level cognitive energy, only where it is absolutely needed.
All right, so let's get into it. Where do we begin?
Let's start with the fundamental diagnosis: deciding how to decide. When organizational leaders are overwhelmed, it's often because they're applying maximum effort to problems that should already be solved, or conversely, not enough rigor to problems that are genuinely new. You have limited time and cognitive capacity. The first, most crucial step in any decision architecture is distinguishing between programmed and non-programmed decisions.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, if you apply the same 3-hour committee meeting rigor to deciding on a minor software update as you do to a $50 million market entry strategy, you're fundamentally allocating your resources. So let's start by defining the program side of that equation, the decisions that are built for efficiency.
Exactly. Programmed decisions are really the bedrock of operational speed. They are, by definition, decisions that are repeated frequently over time. And because of that, a clear existing set of rules, policies, or standard operating procedures, SOPs, can be developed to guide the whole process. The criteria are known, the information is largely predictable, and the outcomes are bounded.
So the characteristics are routine, repetitive, low involvement, meaning they don't need a high-level manager to sign off. And importantly, they're easily teachable to new staff. They're designed to run on mental autopilot.
Precisely. And this speed and efficiency is achieved because these decisions rely so heavily on heuristics.
Mental shortcuts.
Mental shortcuts, exactly. Imagine a production manager overseeing a complex manufacturing line. They don't sit down and recalculate the optimal raw material reorder quantity every Tuesday. They use a preset formula, an economic order quantity, that's triggered when inventory hits a certain level.
Yeah.
That's a sophisticated heuristic, a rule that's been developed over time that reliably yields an adequate solution, even if it's not always the theoretical optimal one.
And that ties directly into the dual system theory of cognition, right?
Right.
The one popularized by Daniel Kahneman. When we rely on these heuristics and programmed decisions, we are leveraging the brain's system one, the reactive system.
System 1 is automatic, it's fast, and it requires very little effort. It's what you use when you tie your shoes or read a sign. For an organization's routine, System 1 is absolutely essential. It minimizes the cognitive burden. I mean, if we didn't automate these decisions, the organization would just grind to a halt under the weight of constant deliberation.
Okay, so that's the efficient, automated side. Now let's contrast that with the decisions that truly keep managers up at night, the non-programmed decisions.
These are the unique, the unstructured challenges. They're often defined by novelty. The criteria for a good decision aren't well defined, and the information you have is ambiguous or incomplete or even contradictory. They demand a high level of involvement.
So now we are talking about genuine complexity, high-risk scenarios, the ones that truly impact the long-term trajectory of the organization. Like deciding whether to pivot the entire business model in response to some new disruptive technology, or managing the fallout from a sudden industry-wide regulatory change. There's no manual for that.
No manual whatsoever. And these situations require the heavy cognitive lift of the brain's system two, the reflective system. This is the slower, deliberate, effortful process. This is where rigorous analysis, critical thinking, creative problem solving, all that systematic evaluation has to occur. Non-programmed decisions demand that managers engage in a deep, rigorous process, a formal analysis, often involving multiple stakeholders and detailed models, to ensure they achieve a high-quality outcome, because the consequences of failure are just so severe.
So if a manager spends 90% of their time in System 1 making routine decisions, they're efficient. But if they spend 90% of their time in System 2,
They're probably inefficient, or their organization has a fundamental structural problem.
right.
Precisely. The ultimate organizational mandate isn't just to make good decisions, it's to minimize the need for non-programmed decisions over time.
So how do high-performing organizations do that?
They continuously capture successful high-involvement outcomes and distill them into robust policies, into training protocols, and into those standard operating procedures we talked about.
You're essentially trying to turn the novel into the routine. The first time a global supply chain is disrupted by some unexpected event, that's a massive non-programmed decision. But after the company develops a codified, data-driven system for scenario planning and automated contingency activation.
Then that decision is largely converted to a programmed one, and that reduces future reliance on individual, high-stress, high-involvement judgment. It's all about learning from every crisis.
Okay, that dichotomy makes a lot of sense. It addresses the nature of the decision and the process you need. But what about scope? Who should be making the choice, and what is its vertical impact? This seems to bring us to that three-tiered hierarchical framework: strategic, tactical, and operational.
Understanding this structure is absolutely essential because it dictates the time horizon, the resources involved, and the required alignment. If the decision scope is wide and the time horizon is long, you have to allocate it to the right level of executive oversight.
Let's start at the very top then, where the company's future is really forged. Strategic decisions.
Strategic choices set the long-term direction, the vision, the mission, the overall goals. We're talking horizons of 3 to 5 years and often extending far beyond that. These are inherently transformative.
So the defining characteristics here are a massive scope organization-wide, high uncertainty and risk, and a significant resource commitment. And crucially, they're almost entirely non-programmed. There's no SOP for deciding whether to merge with a major competitor.
None. Or for exiting a foundational market to chase some blue ocean opportunity. These are the decisions that define organizational existence. If the decision is wrong, the entire company suffers, or it might even fail. For instance, the strategic choice of Blockbuster to focus on physical locations while Netflix focused on digital distribution. That wasn't just a tactical marketing choice.
No, that was existential.
It was an existential strategic decision that determined the fate of the company years later.
Right, moving down the hierarchy, we have the essential implementation bridge, tactical decisions.
Tactical decisions are the mid-level choices that translate that grand strategic vision into actionable medium-term plans. We're typically looking at a span of 6 months to 2 years. They are focused on coordinated action across different departments.
So their scope is departmental or functional, they carry moderate risk, and they exist to answer the question, how will we actually execute the strategy? So if the strategy is to be the low-cost leader in Europe, the tactical decision might be, we will develop a highly efficient, automated supply chain in 3 specific regional hubs within the next 18 months.
Exactly. Allocating the budget for that supply chain, deciding on the locations, developing a specific regional marketing campaign, those are all tactical choices.
And finally, we get down to the ground level, the engine room of the organization, operational decisions.
These are the day-to-day choices that ensure smooth, efficient functioning on a daily or weekly basis. They're very short-term, low risk, and thankfully, highly programmed.
Right. So these are the thousands of small decisions made by frontline staff and first-line supervisors every single day, scheduling employee shifts, adjusting inventory levels based on current sales, handling a specific customer return according to policy.
Yes, they ensure efficient execution. If the strategic goal is met, it is the accumulation of thousands of correctly executed operational decisions that delivered that result.
Which highlights the absolute necessity of what you call the synergy of alignment. It's not enough for each level to be efficient on its own. They have to be vertically cohesive.
Absolutely. The strategic level provides the compass, the tactical level draws the map, and the operational level moves the vehicle forward. If your strategic choice is to move into high-margin luxury goods, but your operational management is incentivized solely on reducing procurement cost,
Which leads them to buy cheaper components.
the strategy is doomed to fail. The daily, seemingly small operational decisions will completely undermine the grand vision.
And high-performing companies, they obsess over this alignment. They look at operational metrics daily, tactical plans monthly, and the strategic direction quarterly. It's a continuous feedback loop.
A feedback loop to ensure that the actions on the ground are always reinforcing the goals of the boardroom. And this is where the sheer complexity of scale demands sophisticated tools. When you have a vast enterprise, manually ensuring that 100,000 daily operational decisions, from factory floor logistics to customer service responses, are all coherently supporting the strategic vision.
That's impossible for human oversight alone.
It is, and this is precisely the gap we address at Twin Labs. We focus on using digital twins and AI to model these multi-level decision dependencies. This technology provides the necessary transparency and predictive capability to ensure that every operational adjustment consistently supports the long-term strategic vision. It essentially eliminates that vertical misalignment as a failure mechanism.
Okay, so we've established the structure programmed versus non-programmed, and the scope strategic, tactical, operational. Now let's overlay that final critical diagnostic layer, the informational context.
Right. The amount and quality of knowledge available is what defines where the decision sits on the certainty-uncertainty spectrum. And this determines the appropriate analytical technique.
We should probably start with the theoretical gold standard, conditions of certainty.
Certainty exists when, with absolute confidence, the alternatives, the conditions, and the outcomes. Accurate, measurable information is available, and cause and effect relationships are totally clear.
But I have to challenge you on this a bit. In the modern business landscape, does true certainty even exist outside of simple physics or basic math? Every day, technology, consumer preference, regulation, it all shifts.
You're right to challenge it. True certainty, especially for any decision that truly matters to organizational performance, is increasingly rare. We call it a condition of certainty, but it's often really near certainty or high predictability. The half-life of knowledge is constantly shortening, meaning what was certain yesterday may be obsolete today. Managers have to recognize that even well-established programmed decisions need periodic reevaluation because the underlying assumptions decay.
So if certainty is the rare ideal, then most of a manager's life is spent operating under conditions of risk.
Risk is the sweet spot for analytical rigor. It's defined by having incomplete but still sufficient information that allows us to assign subjective probability estimates to the various outcomes. We know what might happen, and we can quantify the likelihood of each potential path.
And that quantification immediately leads to a robust analytical approach, maximizing the expected return using the expected value criterion.
That's the classic approach for risk management. Expected value, or EV, is simply the probability-weighted average payoff for an alternative across all possible outcomes.
Yeah.
For every option, you multiply the potential outcome, the dollar value, the performance increase by the likelihood of that outcome occurring, and then you just sum the results.
And the decision maker selects the option with the highest EV, assuming a rational, risk-neutral stance.
Correct. This is also where things like decision trees become indispensable. They are the graphical tool perfectly suited for mapping these expected values, particularly when you have sequential decisions, where the outcome of decision 1 affects the input options for decision 2.
Okay, so from certainty and risk, let's move to the most difficult domain, the one where strategic decisions often reside, conditions of pure uncertainty.
This is the realm of true ignorance. Absolutely no objective knowledge or historical data exists to assign reliable probabilities to future outcomes. Everything is in a state of flux. A disruptive technology, a sudden geopolitical crisis, the launch of a completely novel product category.
If we can't use expected value because we don't have probabilities, what do we rely on?
We rely heavily on judgment, intuition, and, most importantly, the decision-maker's intrinsic attitude toward the unknown. This attitude defines which decision rule they'll follow. And there are 3 key rules under uncertainty, reflecting different psychological profiles.
All right, let's start with the big swingers, the risk seekers, Maximax.
The Maximax rule is for the pure optimist. The manager using this rule ignores all pessimistic outcomes and focuses only on the highest possible payoff for each alternative. Then they choose the alternative that provides the highest overall potential. It's a gamble. They're motivated by the spectacular home run and are willing to accept the risk of complete failure.
And then we have the complete opposite, the ultimate cautious strategy, Maximin.
Maximum is the insurance policy strategy. This rule is for the pessimistic or deeply risk-averse executive who values safety above all else. They examine the worst possible outcome that could result from every single alternative. Then, they choose the alternative that offers the highest minimum payoff. Their goal is to maximize their guaranteed floor to avoid catastrophic failure, even if it means sacrificing spectacular upside.
Fascinating. And finally, there's the more cerebral, almost tortured approach, minimax regret.
This rule is for the manager whose primary fear is missing an opportunity and feeling foolish later. They are regret-averse. To use this, you first have to construct a regret table. You calculate the opportunity loss for every choice.
Meaning, if a certain outcome happened, how much would you regret losing because you chose option A instead of the best possible choice for that outcome?
Precisely. And you then choose the alternative that minimizes this maximum potential regret.
So max-min minimizes the worst financial loss, while minimax regret minimizes the worst emotional loss, the feeling of having made the wrong call after the fact.
You've got it. And this leads us to the strategic mandate for every organizational decision maker. You must actively strive to move every critical decision from the realm of pure uncertainty to the realm of managed risk. Do not settle for ignorance.
So if you're in pure uncertainty, you need to execute a strategy designed to buy information.
Exactly. You buy information by using scenarios to construct alternative narratives about the future. You conduct rigorous, safe-to-fail experiments, prototyping, small market tests to uncover unknown variables. You assign subjective probabilities based on expert consultation, even if the data is thin. The goal is to move from relying on attitude maximum to relying on analysis expected value.
And this brings in that famous example of Jeff Bezos and the Amazon culture, right? Deciding quickly when you have sufficient but not perfect information.
Bezos famously stated that if you wait for 90% certainty, you've probably missed the opportunity. For many decisions, especially strategic ones in dynamic markets, the 70% certainty cutoff point is crucial. Deciding fast and course-correcting based on early feedback is often exponentially better than suffering from analysis paralysis, waiting for a perfect moment that never comes.
Okay, so that sets the stage. When a decision is non-programmed, strategic, and high risk, we can't just rely on a gut feeling. We need formal, systematic processes.
We must. We have to employ these processes to structure the inquiry, to manage the complexity, and to reduce our own internal inconsistencies.
And the ideal benchmark for structuring these complex decisions is, of course, the rational decision-making model.
It is the theoretical ideal, designed to maximize the quality of the outcome. It's an 8-step process designed to force rigor and objectivity into the system.
Let's just list those steps because they really illustrate what rigor looks like in practice. You start by identifying the problem, then you establish criteria for what a good solution looks like. Third, you weigh the criteria. Fourth, and this is key, you're instructed to generate all alternatives. Fifth, evaluate the alternatives against your criteria. Sixth, choose the best one. Seventh, implement. And finally, eighth, evaluate its effectiveness and start the loop all over again.
The strength of this model is its discipline. By forcing you to establish criteria before you even generate or look at alternatives, you structurally prevent yourself from anchoring in confirmation bias. You can't secretly favor option A and then tailor the success metrics to match it.
But I have to bring the reality check in here. The model says generate all alternatives. Is that ever truly possible for complex, real-world problems? Doesn't the pursuit of the optimal solution become the enemy of the good solution?
That's the critical challenge. The rational model assumes perfect information, unlimited time, infinite cognitive ability, no political constraints.
Yeah.
And we know that's not the world we live in.
Right.
As managers, we face imperfect information, tight deadlines, massive cognitive load, and organizational politics that often limit the options we're even allowed to consider.
And that failure to meet the ideal conditions is what led to the profound insights of Nobel laureate Herbert Simon, bounded rationality and satisficing.
Simon recognized that human beings are intendedly rational, but limited by their cognitive capacity, time, and access to information. Bounded rationality describes this reality. Managers consciously limit their options to a manageable set. We can't evaluate 100 choices, so we narrow it down to 5. It saves massive cognitive effort.
And the necessary consequence of being bounded is satisficing. I love that term. Combining satisfy and suffice.
It means accepting the first alternative that meets your minimum criteria, rather than engaging in the exhausting, potentially endless search for the theoretical, absolute best option.
So satisficing isn't laziness, it's pragmatic management, especially in dynamic environments where speed matters.
Exactly. If you're choosing a supplier for a non-critical component and the first supplier meets your minimum standards for quality, cost, and delivery time, you stop searching. You save that valuable System 2 energy for the strategic choices that genuinely require optimization.
Okay, so let's move to the most complex decisions. The ones in systems engineering or high-tech R&D, where simple satisficing isn't enough, but the rational model is too unwieldy. This is where we use trade studies.
Trade studies are the gold standard for non-program decisions with numerous stakeholders, multiple competing objectives like performance versus cost versus schedule, and substantial uncertainty. Their core function is decomposition. We break the overwhelming problem into smaller, logical segments that human experts can manage objectively.
And that involves defining the very concept of value before you even evaluate a solution.
Absolutely essential. The process starts by developing objectives and measures. If your objective is high performance, how do you measure that? Speed, capacity, reliability. You have to define it. And for each measure, we use a value function to transform the raw score-like system speed in seconds into a value score on a scale of 0 to 1. Crucially, this forces us to define the walkaway point, the minimum score below which we reject the alternative outright, and the stretch goal, the maximum value we can achieve.
That immediately sounds like a structural safeguard against irrational choices. It forces executives to define their non-negotiables up front.
It does. But the truly difficult part is weighing those competing objectives. How do you weigh low operating cost against high reliability? This is where you use something called a swing weight matrix.
Okay, let's not get lost in the jargon. What's the function of the swing weight? Why is it better than just ranking criteria as most important, second most important, and so on?
That's the core insight. Simple ranking fails because it doesn't account for how much of a difference a criterion makes. The swing weight forces an honest conversation not about the importance of the criterion itself, but about the value of moving from the worst acceptable outcome to the best possible outcome.
So if you can only marginally improve speed, but you could dramatically improve cost.
Then the cost objective gets a higher swing weight because it offers a greater potential swing in overall value. It ensures your resources are focused on the criteria where you have the most leverage.
And once this complex analysis is done, how do you communicate the trade-offs effectively to the senior executive team? That's where synthesis is critical.
The output has to be accessible. We use visualization, specifically tools like the stakeholder value scatter plot.
That sounds dense. What does this plot achieve for the C-suite that a spreadsheet can't?
A scatter plot allows you to visualize 5 or 6 dimensions of value at the same time. Imagine plotting alternatives A, B, and C. The x-axis is unit cost, the y-axis is performance value, the size of the marker is development risk, and the color is schedule delay probability.
I see. So a single integrated visualization lets the decision maker instantly assess all the key dimensions: performance, cost, risk at a glance.
It transforms data into actionable insight. And when uncertainty is still a factor, we have to introduce probabilistic analysis, often using Monte Carlo simulations.
The sheer volume of analysis required for these non-programmed strategic choices, it just shows why trying to do this manually in a traditional way often leads to failure.
It's physically impossible for System 2 to manage this volume of data accurately. And this is why Twin Labs technology provides such critical value. By automating and enforcing the systematic process, the decomposition, the swing weighting, the Monte Carlo analysis, we allow the human managers to focus on the high-level judgment and creative thinking. We structurally protect them from the cognitive burden that forces them into premature satisficing when optimization is mandatory.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on structure and process, but ultimately, the human decision maker is still the interface between the data and the action. And even when managers strive for that System 2 rationality, they remain vulnerable to the invisible trap: cognitive biases.
These aren't just mistakes. They are reliable, systematic distortions of objective reality rooted in our evolutionary need for quick judgment.
And even deliberate System 2 reasoning isn't immune. You can spend weeks on a trade study and still let a bias derail the outcome if you don't build in safeguards.
Exactly. We need to focus on the biases that are most dangerous to large organizations, the ones that reliably sabotage major investments and strategic direction.
Let's start with the bias that plagues all valuation and negotiation: the anchoring trap.
Anchoring is the tendency to give disproportionate weight to the first piece of information you receive, the anchor. It then skews all subsequent judgments, even if that anchor is demonstrably irrelevant. Think of an M&A negotiation. The seller throws out an initial grossly inflated price. Even if the buyer's analysis proves that price is fiction, subsequent offers tend to hover too close to that initial anchor, costing the buyer millions simply because of the opening statement.
It's the stickiness of the past derailing the present. Next, let's talk about the enemy of innovation, the status quo trap.
This one is so comfortable, isn't it? It's the strong bias toward alternatives that maintain the present comfort zone. It's avoiding action that disrupts the current system. This isn't just inertia. It's often driven by the calculation that the risk of making an error by acting outweighs the risk of inaction.
But in rapidly changing markets, the status quo is a decision, and it's often the most dangerous one.
It absolutely is. And finally, the emotionally painful trap that throws good money after bad. The sunk cost trap.
Oh, I've definitely seen this one in action.
It's the decision to continue investing resources, money, time, people into a project purely because of the previous irreversible investment, not based on future viability. The unwillingness to admit a mistake becomes more powerful than objective analysis of the future.
This has massive organizational consequences. It's amplified in organizations where failure is heavily penalized.
Beyond those, we have to highlight the ones that corrupt data and communication. Confirmation bias is the active sabotage of information gathering. You seek out information that confirms what you already believe while ignoring anything that contradicts it.
So if the CEO believes a certain acquisition target is perfect, every employee presenting data will subconsciously or consciously filter that information to confirm the CEO's belief. It creates a decision bubble.
And we must mention rankism bias. This is the assertion of authority based purely on organizational rank, regardless of decision quality or expertise. It's catastrophic in high-stakes environments. The classic example is the 1977 Tenerife air disaster, where a junior flight engineer rightly questioned the captain's readiness to take off, but his challenge was dismissed due to the captain's authority. The hierarchy trumped the data.
So since we know the human mind is hardwired for these shortcuts, relying on individual willpower to fight bias is a fool's errand. We need decision architecture structural safeguards built into the organizational process itself.
The primary safeguard is independent review. This means getting advice from an independent technical authority, or ITA, that is organizationally and financially independent of the program being reviewed. This structural independence ensures objectivity.
Another brilliant technique for actively countering optimism and confirmation bias is the premortem.
The premortem forces a cognitive flip. Before the final decision, the team gathers trusted experts and asks them to assume the project has failed spectacularly 18 months from now. Then they ask, why did it fail?
So it shifts the discussion from what could possibly go wrong to what did go wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This structural debiasing uncovers flaws and risks that would otherwise be ignored.
And again, the tools we build at Twin Labs provide intrinsic structural mitigation against this.
They do. By forcing users to adhere to a systematic, criteria-based evaluation process, the technology itself acts as a behavioral safety protocol. When the tool requires you to input a walkaway point and a stretch goal, you are structurally preventing the anchoring trap, because you have to define value based on the full range of outcomes, not just the first estimate you saw. Technology enforces the rigor that our minds naturally want to skip.
This has been a fantastic journey through the architecture of decision-making. Let's try to distill it down to a few key takeaways for our listeners.
Okay, if you take 4 things away from this deep dive, let them be these foundational pillars.
First, diagnose the type and rigor required. Instantly distinguish between programmed routine, low involvement, System 1 decisions, which you must automate, and non-programmed novel, high-involvement System 2 decisions, which require full, rigorous scrutiny.
Second, align vertically to scope. Ensure that every choice made at the operational and tactical levels consistently and demonstrably supports the long-term, high-stakes strategic vision. Misalignment here is the #1 cause of organizational waste and strategy failure.
Third, actively manage the unknown. Your mandate is to move decisions from pure uncertainty, where you're relying on risk attitude rules like Maximin or Maximax to managed risk, where you can apply expected value. Prioritize gathering information and recognize that for most dynamic strategic decisions, 70% certainty is often the time to pull the trigger.
And fourth, institutionalize decision architecture. Don't trust intuition alone. Build structural safeguards, formal checks like independent reviews, pre-mortems, and systematic analytical tools from places like Twin Labs into your process to structurally counter dangerous, predictable cognitive biases like anchoring, the sunk cost trap, and confirmation bias.
That brings us to our final provocative thought. We discussed Herbert Simon's concept of satisficing choosing the first acceptable solution rather than eternally pursuing the optimal one. Given the modern pace of technological change, the ever-shortening half-life of critical information, ask yourself, how many of your organization's biggest strategic challenges today might be better served by pragmatically aiming for good enough, implemented now, rather than forever pursuing perfect, delayed forever?
The efficient allocation of your system to capacity, knowing when to satisfice and when to optimize. That is perhaps the ultimate high-leverage decision. The time saved by efficient satisficing can then be reinvested into the truly rigorous analysis required for those critical, irreversible strategic commitments.
We hope this deep dive into decision architecture has provided actionable insights for your professional journey. Thank you for joining us today. Visit the Twin Labs website for more business insights.